Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Creator News Live. I'm so glad this is kind of the second show we did right out of doing Ecamp's Creator Camp and speaking at CEX. It's just been a crazy, crazy time, and we're heading to Momentum. I'm going to head down to the Unsinkable Connor Brown's neck of the woods in a couple days, so that will be fun. That's the last big one of the year. But Connor Brown, you're fresh from Ireland, right? Like, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, it had to be an amazing time.
Oh, it was fantastic. So this is my second time to Ireland. This is my first time we exclusively played golf pretty much and then bounced around some towns. It was just me and my dad. So it was an unbelievable father-son trip, playing some courses that were on our bucket list, some of the best in the world. And it was great to be able to do it with him, walking alongside him on all those courses. It was fantastic. Plenty of pints of Guinness as well. And Jeff, I'm excited because this week I get to see Jeff C., who's coming to Momentum. And no, you cannot crash on my couch. I'm sorry.
Come on, man. Okay.
Right.
Well, anyway. So I'm excited for this, guys. You guys joining in. We're going to be talking all about visual marketing today. You know, this is one of my favorite topics. And this guy is amazing. I got to meet him at CEX. He was kind enough to come to my session. He probably and I'm like, okay, he's got to help me with my visuals. Like, that's the whole reason here. But he wrote this great book. We're going to be talking about this today, The Visual Marketer, from our friends at Tilt Publishing. But this is like I was telling him in the green room. This like scratches my itch because it's got so much stuff about marketing, but then the visual stuff and stories about brands, stories about things that Jim has done. Really, really good. I highly, highly recommend this one. He was kind enough to give me this book, and he signed it right there in the intro. But I also bought the digital copy because I love to take notes, and we'll talk about that a little bit because there's a hack that I use so much. But this is like, all your favorite people. Joe Paluzzi, Mark Schaefer wrote like the intro. I mean, this is really, really good. So if you watch this show, you're going to like this book. So make sure you guys check that out. We've got our friends already showing up in the chat. We've got Mr. Chris Stone saying, hello, gentlemen. Man, he's awful proper today. Because Connor's back from Ireland. He wants to be on his best behavior. And right. My friend Rich Cram says, Heidi ho, gang. Heidi ho to you, Rich. Thank you for tuning in. Jim, Boston, just there. Great area. How long have you lived there?
I've lived here my whole life. I was down in Connecticut for a couple of years right after school, but yeah, I've been here in kind of central New England for my whole life.
Very, very cool. So I'm going to hit go on the podcast machine, and we get started. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Ready.
Okay, here we go. Hello, folks. Welcome to Creator News Live. I'm Jeff C., and you're not.
And I'm Connor Brown, and this is the show that keeps you up to date on what's happening in the creator economy and so much more.
You ever struggled to make your visuals stand out in a crowded feed? Maybe you've wondered why some brands instantly grab attention while others fade into the scroll. Or maybe you've tried designing your own graphics and thought, there's got to be a smarter way to do this. If any of that sounds familiar, you're going to want to stick around for this episode because today we're joined by a creative strategist who bridges the world of design and marketing to help brands communicate with clarity and confidence. With decades of experience leading award-winning teams and shaping how companies show up online, Jim MacLeod is here to share how anyone, even non-designers, can use visuals to connect and convert. So sit back, clear your schedule, clear your mind, and get ready for this week's episode of Creator News Live. Jim, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we've been doing this. You guys know I'm kind of a fan of this new AI. So we have also got a theme music. I talked about this at Ecamp's. So I'm going to go ahead and play that right now. And then Connor will hit the intro. So here we go.
It's Jim MacLeod, okay. He'll show your brand a better way. Designs that make your message stay. It's Jim MacLeod today.
There we go. It's Jim MacLeod. We actually use Suno for that. They've come out with a new version, which is even better. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Jim, thank you again for being here.
That was amazing. Thank you.
You know what, Jeff? We got to start using that in our marketing for guests. Come on the show, get your own free soundtrack.
That's true. That's true.
Music. I mean, that's how it is. If you don't know who Jim is, you should, because Jim is a designer turned marketer with 25 years of experience across agencies, startups, and billion-dollar brands. He's led creative and digital strategy in tech, higher ed, and retail. He's built award-winning in-house teams and helped companies improve how they show up in the world. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Ebrius, a brand and digital marketing consultancy. He's also the author of The Visual Marketer, a book for marketers and communicators who are suddenly expected to design and want to do it well. Thanks again for being here, Jim. And we were talking a little bit before the show. My Latin, my great Catholic school Latin taught me that Ebrius, you are a co-founder and CMO, is Latin for intoxicated, or comes from the root intoxicated, drunk. As the chat knows, you're in good company because most of us do indulge in the drink.
Chris may actually be indulging right now. I'll just mention Google Plus, and he always takes a drink when I do that. So we've got more people chiming in, but first I want to do a big shout out to our friends. We're talking about visual marketing today. And the sponsors of the show is our friends over at Ecamm. You can find out more about them at ecamm.com/Jeff. Use code Jeff15 to save 15% on your first purchase. But holy cow, can they make your stuff look good online? This is what we use for our show. We can use it to create presentations, all sorts of things. They also have an amazing community, ecamm.com/Jeff. Make sure you guys go check that out. But we're talking about the book right now, The Visual Marketer by Jim MacLeod. We do have our friends showing up today. Before we get into it, I wanted to say Doghouse Dog. He's actually watching from Boston, just south of Boston. Kevin, I believe that's it, Kevin Shea. And so I'm glad to see him there. And then Amy Keys, we mentioned at the start of the show, so excited about this topic. So we're going to dive into it, Amy. And the first question I have for the actual audience, when you're scrolling the feed, what kind of visuals makes you stop, right? Like, what is it? Is it the bold colors? Is it faces? Is it quotes? Is it something weird or funny? I want to know if you guys kind of dive into the last time you stopped and watched an ad or something on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. What made you stop? I want to know. Let us know wherever you're watching from. But Jim, we're going to talk about your book. And the first thing, I really like your science of seeing kind of chapter. What two habits should a small team or a solopreneur even do right after watching the show to align their graphics with how people naturally scan content? Because you talked about this a lot in your book. I thought it was really fascinating. And so how would you use that philosophy to do a LinkedIn carousel or a YouTube thumbnail? Just talk a little bit about that, the way we actually look at content online.
So the reality is we don't read a whole lot of content, right? We scan and then determine where we should stop and read. So what you want to do is make it easy for them to absorb that. If you start putting up giant paragraphs of text, people aren't going to read that to see if there's something valuable in there. So that's why you see a lot of websites, a lot of content on LinkedIn or other systems. There are a lot of bullet points because it's okay, people are just kind of looking for keywords. Is this interesting? Is this entertaining? And then they'll dive in a little deeper. Or they're looking for visuals that appeal to them. And now it's tricky because everyone has their own preferences. But in a lot of times, faces are a good way to draw people in. Bold type is another way. You especially see that when it comes to YouTube thumbnails. And it's really interesting because YouTube will, it's great because it'll put up, you can upload multiple thumbnails and the AI will then tell you which one's performing best. So if you start to look at your analytics and see what's working, that's a good way to see, okay, what is my audience looking for? So understanding that allows you to make your future graphics much easier.
So I kind of have two questions to follow up on this, Connor. The first one is, because you talked about the Z pattern and how we look and watch. Is that just for landscape style images, or would you even say because all the short form content and all the stuff we've got going on, is that still applicable? Is it just a longer, bigger Z? Do we still continue to do that on the tall images or vertical?
Yeah, we do, because it's just how those of us in the Western world have learned how to read, right? We start in the upper left-hand corner and then work our way through. And if you can design your visuals, your video, your web pages, whatever it is, to follow that natural inclination, then that will help people absorb it easier. Because if you put your big headline down in the lower left and then something else, in different places, the the way you want people to view around your page, if you start breaking people's natural inclinations for how they want to read, it creates tension and it creates more effort on their part, and they're more likely just to keep scrolling.
Mm. One of the things that you gave a great example in the book is a lot of times we want our logo to pop because that's our brand, And you even showed an example of how you have the text and using that same Z pattern. You still had the logo on there, but you really had it kind of muted and not as important because you don't want the eye to fight with that. And so I really liked, there's so many great examples in that book, but that was one that really stuck out to me. Is like, okay, you don't have to have your logo super bright to keep it on brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you need to think. So some businesses, obviously, their logo carries a lot of brand affinity,
Mm-hmm.
but in a lot of cases, people are just looking for specific content. So what you want to do, if they're just looking for a specific content, you need your headline to jump out more than your logo. And so a lot of times it's creating that visual hierarchy. What do you want them to see first? And then to get them to stop scrolling, and then they can consume the rest of the visual.
Mm. All right, last question on this one. Sorry, Connor. This is really fascinating to me because I cut my teeth in Pinterest. Like that was my thing. It's still my biggest thing, and you talk about Pinterest a lot in the book. But one of the things, and I used to do this for brands, is they would have me put their entire catalog on Pinterest. And for a while, we would, like, especially for like outfits or something, we would specifically crop off the model's head because the thought, at least back then, is that just like a mannequin doesn't have a face on it, is that you want those people to see themselves in that outfit and not so much, comparing themselves with the model or whatever. That has kind of gone away, and that doesn't really happen, especially on Instagram. Is that just a style philosophy that's gone out of, style and may swing back? Or do you think that was flawed to begin with, that we can imagine ourselves no matter what, the model is or how it's actually portrayed? What are your thoughts on that?
It is interesting because there was a website maybe 10, 15 years ago called She Has No Head.
Right.
And it was mostly in the comic book space, but it started to identify just the objectification of women,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're only showing a woman from the neck
Right.
down, you're kind of taking her presence out of it.
Right.
And so I think as the world has become more enlightened over time, we're kind of realizing that, like, oh, that, there's more to a woman than just her body.
Right.
So I think that could be part of that. But then the other thing that I talk about in the book is the value of faces and drawing people
Right.
in,
Right.
because we are trained from the minute we're born, we need to find safety, and faces help indicate who's a safe place and who's a threat. And so that's something we learn really on. And it just goes back to like the basic primal parts of our brain of we need comfort, we need safety, and faces will help indicate that. So that's why we're drawn to faces whenever we see them.
Gotcha. I don't know about this face, but it is safe. Safe.
I was going to say, if we cut off Jeff's head to show his bowling shirts off, we'd first just see half of his beard, and that might be more off-putting.
That would be freaky. Yeah.
Figure. Yeah. Jim, you've talked about, and you've mentioned how visuals in your book, you talk about how visuals can be a shortcut to brand recognition, right? So somebody sees a visual, they know it's in your style, they immediately know, oh, that's XYZ brand. I think it takes a lot of time to get to that level, right? And it takes a lot of content creation and putting your content out there before people absolutely start recognizing that that visual corresponds to that brand. But are there some simple tests or metrics that you can kind of run or see or look at to really understand that your visual system is working, is getting to that point where people are seeing these visuals and they understand their brand? Are there metrics and stuff we can kind of look at for that?
If you're doing customer surveys on visuals and graphics, one of the things that you can do is do kind of a low resolution, almost pixelated version of your graphics. And does your audience or do your consumers, are they able to recognize this is you versus this is your competitor versus somebody else? So if you reduce it down and, really kind of get to the core message of what it is, that will be able to tell you, do my visuals resonate without my logo? I used to work for a CMO years ago who said, if you took the logo off of our slides or content or whatever, would people be able to distinguish this is ours versus this is our competitors? And so that drove us to kind of really change, reevaluate how we were putting these things together, because we did want it to be uniquely ours. So then it was more of, okay, just make sure the logo's on there. It is, what's our typeface, what's our color, what are kind of the basics of the brand that we need. But then it is, okay, can the user still tell what that is without the logo?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the other thing, we've kind of done it with our team is, and you talked about Pinterest and Instagram. There was a really, and it's still a problem, but they love to use those scripty fonts, like where you can't read them. Like if you shrink them down to the size of a phone, you can't, I don't even know what your logo is. Like it just looks like a scribble on the screen. And I know that's kind of a trend in like Pinterest and Instagram. And I've always told the team, like, shrink, don't, it looks different when you have a big widescreen monitor and you're designing your YouTube thumbnails on Photoshop, but shrink it down and see if you can still read that stuff, like it'll be the size on a phone or whatever. So I know you talked about that a lot in your book as well, is like making sure it looks and testing it. You have a lot of stuff in your book about how to test it in the best way and the ways to even optimize your funnel. But one of the things you say a lot about in your book, you repeat over and over, be consistent. Like, be consistent. It's very important. That's how people know your brand, is like, don't be swapped. I mean, we're creatives and we want to switch stuff out, but we need to be consistent. So where is it safe to be playful without harming recognition? Like, because we're talking, I know this audience is full of these really creative people, and it's a struggle. We're very like squirrel, going to the next thing. We want to try this new AI platform or whatever. So when can you help your team or even yourself, like, set those guardrails so it's not boring? You can be consistent, but still not be boring.
And that, like you said, that's the struggle, is people want to do new things, new exciting things, but you need that solid visual brand foundation from the start. And you can't mess with that for a couple of years, really. I recommend, 2 to 3 years of not straying from what you're doing. But then where you can start to stray is if you have, say, an event. You can you can expand your brand guidelines by 15-20% for a particular event. Everything related to that event can have this new kind of sub style, but then realize that that sub style ends at the end of that event. That then doesn't go into your next campaign, because what happens is then you start training people. Oh, I've seen these visuals before and it's tied to that event. Now that I see this, this banner ad for a webinar, it must be tied to the event. And you don't want to do that, because people are consuming these things and learning on a regular basis. So you want to make sure that what you're putting out there is always consistent and it's always clear who it is and the baseline of what your brand is. But where you get to be creative is in events or in other kind of one-off use cases. But you want to make sure not to do big visual brand shifts without a lot of kind of research and thought put into it. And you don't want to be changing it up every 2 years or whatever, which is always challenging with, short CMO tenures. They want to come in and they're like, we need to change this and change this and change this. Like, no, we're just getting to a point of recognition. We need to keep building on it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, the thing about being, I worked for a creative director years ago who said, oh, I'd love to be a designer for Apple. I said, there's no creativity there whatsoever. It is basic type on a white or a black box, in one image. Like but that is Apple, and that's a sign of quality because they've stuck to that simple visual identity.
Yeah, and like your point was, like, even in Apple, they're creative in their ads, like the 1984 ad, and then like even when they're doing new stuff and the new iPhone stuff, like that icon that they use for the Apple is always the same at the end, but they have a little bit of fun playing. So I think your point of, like, you can be creative in other ways, but keep your visual branding, like, on point. So I think that's really, really good. And we have got some great comments. Rich said, we were talking about the scribbly fonts. Like, he says, like, the fonts on Live, Laugh, Love, Throw Pillows, and Kitchen Art. That's very, very true. Yeah. And we got people, the Connor's back. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But and then Amy says, boring is good. It's so hard to convince teams of that. I am often the brand police. No unicorns and glitter if it's not part of your brand. Yeah. She's got a very solid brand as well for her.
Everybody thinks they're a designer.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Canva
Canva, go for it.
has introduced a lot of the script typography
Yes.
that's out there, and it's tricky because sometimes you'll look at somebody's Instagram page, and it is just different typefaces and
Right.
colors and everything on like there's no consistency, but you can tell they're just using whatever new template that Canva
Hmm.
produced that they like. They're putting it out there, and that's where, if you are a Canva user, upgrade to the pro plan, have their brand standards, brand guidelines, and then just create things within there. Yes, it feels old. Yes, it feels boring, as she said, but the reality is your your prospects aren't consuming every single thing you're putting out. It might be boring to you, but it's not boring to them because they're only seeing one out of every 6 or 7 things that you're putting out there.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think it's on the pro plan with Canva, is you can upload your own fonts. So what I like to do if I'm doing something and I'm designing something is actually go find like a font designer, or you can buy like these specific kind of boutique fonts that you can use that a lot of people aren't using, and you can use that and upload that in your brand design in Canva. And you also, I just want to mention this real quick, Connor, before we go on to your question, is that you talk about like getting stuff designed by a designer, like having them build your Canva templates for you, and then you can use those to create all your assets and stuff. I thought that's genius. I've been talking about that for a long time. So we're not talking about getting rid of designers, but we're using them in the most optimized way we can possible.
Yeah, and I've done that for different companies and businesses where they don't want to hire a full-time designer, but
Mm-hmm.
they want those professional looking templates. And so I'll create a whole bunch of custom templates for them, and then they're able to just move forward with it. So it's one of those interesting things where I know a lot of designers with the kind of old school mentality of like, well, no, I want that recurring revenue. But the reality is a lot of these businesses don't have that sort of money. So be helpful where you can.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, and I think that that also helps build a relationship, right? Like when you give them
Mhm.
that, they are more inclined to come back to you when they do have another project or a need for that versus they think you're, just dragging them along or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But it's important to stay within those guardrails. So you give them a template and stuff like that. They still have to be consistent and stick with it and not go rogue like what Amy's dealing with all over here. You also talked about a lot the importance of learning from your competitors, right? Even though you want to be consistent, there's experiment and things like that. Can you kind of through what you think a competitor visual SWOT looks like, especially with a Pinterest board and using that to kind of get some ideas from your competitors?
Yes, using Pinterest to create a SWOT analysis can be really helpful because you just go through, find everything that they're doing, collect it into a board, and then you'll start to see, okay, are they focused on one color? Do they use a lot of product photography? Are they using people? Are they using bold fonts and light fonts and whatever type of typography that they're using? You can start to see what's working or how they're using it. And then there are other tools out there that can help you kind of see what's actually performing well. It's too bad. There used to be a website called moat.com where
Mm-hmm.
you could see everyone's ads that were out there. And, but then they got acquired and they're not really used. But one place where you can see how competitors' ads are performing is Facebook in the Meta ad place. And so you can go in and see, you type in any company and it'll show you all the ads that have been running for them and duration and some stats that go along with it. So that's really kind of interesting to see, okay, what's performing for them? What do they have running for a long time, right? Because if something's
Right.
running for a long time, it must be performing well, or they're not paying any attention. But you want to, that there's a lot of information out there now that didn't used to be available to us. So and Pinterest is a great way to figure out what the white space is, like where are your competitors not covering? What are they not talking about? What are they not using for visuals? And then that kind of gives you some guidelines about how you can establish your own visual brand.
I
Yeah.
think that that's a great thing that you can use like an AI, like a chat GPT to follow up on as well. You kind
Mhm.
of consolidate this information and then you have it help you also find that white space that you're not even thinking about. I use that tip when it comes to looking at competitors' Facebook ads all the time. And if you really want to humble yourself, go to Nike and see how many ads they're running. And you're like, that's a different league.
Yeah.
I'm not there.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah. Years ago, I used a tool called TrackMaven to follow competitors and see what they were doing, just kind of all across the digital ecosystem. And we saw this one ad from one of our competitors taking off. We're like, oh, what's going on here? Like, I want to pay attention to it. Yeah, it was a Peter Dinklage Cisco ad that had run like during the Super Bowl. I'm like, okay, we're not competing with that at all.
Right.
So like we're just going to take that one out. Like we'll take out the French judge's score for that one because it's throwing off all the metrics.
Yeah, very, very true. And I love your idea of going, and you mentioned in your book zigging when other people are zagging, and the white space thing. I mean, it's actually kind of why we're doing those goofy little intro songs for guests, because no one else, I mean, they can now, but most people aren't doing a custom intro for a guest. And so that's what, so the same way with your visuals, like what can you do that other people can't, and how can you expand your space? And you don't want to copy people, but there are some places where you can look at your competitors and go, oh, they're not doing that and I can. How can I move quicker on that? So I thought that's another great section in the book where you talk a lot about that. We've got some great comments as well. Amy says she shut down so many rogue Canva accounts. Yeah, I joke, and even my presentation, like it used to be like you could go and say, oh, there's a Canva template. Oh, there's a Canva template. In Pinterest, you could just watch and see them scroll through. And then Rich says, because he does this in branded merch, this is a struggle too. So many want to print their entire mailing address on a cheap giveaway pin rather than a more thoughtful message on a better, smarter product. The other thing I saw somebody was doing was that they were giving out stuff, but they weren't putting their logo on it. They were putting their person they were sending it to's logo on it. So because you get so many stuff with like, oh, here's like, I love Ecamm. I got their Ecamm pin. But what if you sent somebody if they sent me my logo on a pin and said, hey, we love what you're doing. Here's, we made a couple of these for you. I've had that happen a couple of times, and that is incredibly effective. So once again, to Jim's point, zig when other people are zagging. So,
and on the topic of rogue Canva accounts,
yeah,
I work for this one multi-billion-dollar company, and Canva reached out to me and they said, do you know you have 75 individual Canva licenses across your company?
Oh, gosh.
And I oversaw 3 different design teams, and the brand design team was one of them. And I was like, okay, this is not right. And so they're basically like, hey, unify it all, set up brand standards, do the pro account for all the users, and then you can actually control what they're putting out there. But budget was going to be an issue because it was a large company, and who do you license and who do you not license?
Yeah.
But Canva was actually smart to reach out and say, you realize that your own employees are damaging your brand because they're doing this rogue work, and you have no idea what they're putting out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, it's really interesting with the licensing. You can add up some money really quick, even if you're on a small team. It can add up really quick. So this last question I have, like, for distinct assets like color, because you talked about like some brands that actually own the color, like Tiffany's blue and some stuff like that. Like they have the copyright to use it on their packaging and all that, and you can't make a Tiffany blue box because that's illegal. But what can small brands do to like own a cue practically without like legal headaches or going and trying to copyright a Pantone color or something like that? So what can us as small business owners, solopreneurs do to have those like distinctive assets that are distinctively ours?
I'd say first and foremost, make sure you're using that color wherever possible. Even if it's just kind of a simple little line or stroke at the bottom of your banner ad or cover or whatever it is, make sure that color is always there and you're always tying back to it. And then, use it as often as possible so that people start to associate, okay, when I see this color, it means this company, which means quality. A former coworker of mine said that. He's like, we want people to think that when they see our product, out of a whole rack of other products that look similar from other vendors, ours are purple, and we want them to know this is not where the problem is because this is high quality, and we don't have to worry about that one because it's purple and it's a good one.
Got it. So, and you're at my presentation. One of the things I talk about visual improv, and one of them was like commit 100%. So how important is it, do you think, that not only do you need to have all this visual branding down, and you have a design sheet that has all your fonts and all your colors and all that stuff. How important is it to love your branding? Because I think a lot of the problems that we talked about earlier is people trying new things is because they always think the grass is greener on the other side, and they really haven't fallen in love with their brand. And it's hard to commit 100% on something if you get bored with it, or it's going to, you're going to get bored with it after a year. So how do you, I guess, balance falling in love with something that you really like and then something that's very practical and eye-catching?
You need to think about, first and foremost, what works. Like it's not about you, right? You're not the customer. You're not the target audience. It's what they're looking for. And the same company I was just referencing, the Purple Company, we'd actually worked for a different company and were acquired by the Purple Company. And so many people that I worked with were like, oh, purple. Like, why? Like, we're in technology. Why are we using purple?
Right.
But then I went to a big trade show event at the time called Interop, and I looked around, and it was like 70% of the companies there were blue, 25% were red, and 5% were every other color. So I said, okay, this is where we can really stand out. If we own purple, really kind of get out there, like I'm not somebody who's going to wear a lot of purple on a regular basis, but I went all in on it because I'm like, nobody else is here. This is a space we can own with this color.
Well, one of the things is like for me, we love the old fashioned like 50s kind of aesthetic. And so we've leaned into that really hard. And the funny thing is people are going, they recognize it in the feed. They recognize, oh, this is Jeff's because it's like, it's classic, I guess, or whatever. And people have really enjoyed that. So that's why we're leaning into it. And we enjoy making it here too. So I think it's a yes and kind of a thing where you have both of them if you can make it. So
I did that recently with my newsletter, my Marketing by Design newsletter, where after issue 100, I said, okay, all of my graphics are going to be cyan, magenta, and yellow. And so that's part of my big prompt that I have when I'm making my imagery, so that every week when people are scrolling and they see those bright colors, okay, that's this newsletter, and I want to read it because they already know what's inside. They just need to see that to kind of trigger them to say, hey, I should stop and read it.
That's a great point.
I think that's so awesome. But I also think, I've been in the situation too before where we have a creative director or a CMO or something, and I'm just so bored with our brand. I'm just bored. We need a redesign. And you're like, why do you need a redesign? Do you want a redesign because you look at it every single day and you're bored with it? Boring is good, right? Boring means consistency. Boring means you're going to get the same thing every single time. And people take comfort in knowing that verse you're changing this, that, and the other constantly. That means you're unpredictable, chaotic, right? Those types of words gravitate towards those actions that you're doing. I do think there are some ways to have fun with your own brand, have fun with your own designs, and kind of do it in a short sprint, what have you. Amy Keys brings up a great point. She's like, can we talk about all of the brands doing a green-orange thing and jumping on the Taylor Swift bandwagon this month, obviously for her new album, The Life of a Showgirl, which I know Jeff has on repeat.
Not Amy Keys. That's not her album. You mean Taylor Swift?
Taylor Swift's album.
Yeah,
Taylor Swift's album. Yes. But Jim, we've seen that. Or people change up their brand for a month to celebrate a certain cause or something like that. What do you say to that? Is that something that, if done right, it can be done well? Or is it something that it can also be really, really chaotic and unorganized?
I think if it's done right, it can be a huge it can really help things. And the reason is, like, I wrote about that, the Taylor Swift orange phenomenon. And because I found a bunch of articles, and some people were down on the whole concept. They thought it was, newsjacking a little bit too much. But the reality is, it shows to your audience that you're willing to have some fun. You're willing to do something that's a little bit outside of your, like, this is my corporate thing and this is what I talk about. And it could open you up to a new audience, right? Like if you're selling, some high-tech system, and a 15-year-old girl might not know anything about it, and she's not going to care for a long time. But she might talk about, to her parents or whomever, like, hey, I saw this thing. I heard you talk about this company a while ago. they just did this Taylor Swift thing, and now that's a conversation. And now indirectly, your brand's being mentioned at the dinner table with
Mm,
somebody who could be a potential buyer. But and just to get your name in those articles, right? Because they're always the recap articles. It's another way to get out there. And if you are in that target audience, if Taylor Swift fans are somebody who might buy your product, then it creates an affinity there, and they might be more likely to buy your coffee or attend your school.
interesting.
Jeff, I have a follow-up question around
Go for
that.
it.
Jim, you mentioned how it can produce an indirect kind of action with that, right? In today's day and age, especially in marketing, if it's not trackable, a lot of higher ups don't want to deal with it, right? They want to know $1 in is $2 out, and here's why, because this click happened or this impression happened or with that. With branding, it's so much more about the intangibles, the things that can't be tracked, right? How do you make the justification for those things, for the things that can't be measured, especially when you have an executive that's really, really overbearing or really wants to focus only on the numbers? How do you go about that?
I try to explain that the marketing landscape is changing dramatically, and it has been the last 2.5 years or so. AI is it now brand is more important than ever because of AI, and because everyone's putting out so much content, and there's you know could potentially be better content than what you're putting out, but you want people to have that brand recognition and brand affinity. And so now it's no longer, because brand isn't easy to measure, right? Which is
Yeah.
why everyone shifted over to performance marketing. But the reality is you need that brand to kind of sustain things, especially as we get into this, post Google, post social media world where you're not getting any traffic or anything from those sources. Or you're still getting some, but not like we used to.
Right, right.
So now you need that brand recognition so that people are now Googling you as opposed to Googling the solution that you offer, because they're likely to not end up on your site after they Google it. So you want to be top of mind for when they are ready to buy. And that's where brand comes in. So yes, it's not brand isn't we spend $1 here, we get $2 here, but over the long term, the brand really helps pay off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we're gonna jump into this the AI question, because it was really funny, because Jim, it always makes me nervous when designers come up to me after my talk about AI. I'm like, oh, are we gonna have to, like, am I have to run away from Jim, like, coming at me? But no, he does a really great job in the book of using AI in the right way and using it as a tool, and coming it from, just like how when Canva came out, things had to change. AI is forcing some change. So I want to ask you guys, have you used any AI tools like Midjourney? Canva's got it baked in, Firefly, for your marketing visuals? I mean, how many people are using AI to create that? I see Dustin's in here, the founder and CEO and head cheese over at Magi, and he goes, his brand bucket list now is to own a color, which, the way Dustin's been going, he's going to have a Magi color pretty soon, because he is growing like gangbusters over there. Thanks, Dustin, for popping in. But have you guys used any for your marketing visuals? I want to know, what's your biggest win, and what's your biggest frustration on creating those visuals with AI? I'd love to know. Let us know down below wherever you're watching from. But let's talk about AI in the design stack. So it was real. I had never heard anybody say this before, but you said that AI tends to average out, like, kind of, because everybody's trying to hit the easy button, and you're hitting, just the bare minimum AI. So what is your checklist, Jim, for getting past average when starting with AI? Like, when do you abandon what you're doing and move on to like Photoshop or something that you mentioned before that you're using it to create your graphics for your newsletter? So when do you go like, this isn't working, I'm going to go back to Photoshop or Illustrator, what I'm used to? And when do you continue to use and ideate on AI?
The thing that I've seen is average inputs create average outputs. So if you just put a simple prompt in there, then you're going to get something simple back. I tend to jump around through different tools. So I now see AI as just another design tool. And I was working on a book cover recently where I did some rough sketches in Procreate on my iPad, uploaded that to AI to come up with some basic imagery. And then I brought that into Photoshop, did some manipulation there, And then I brought it into Illustrator, start laying the type on top of it. So that was my kind of my design stack for creating that cover. And it was that, the AI it speeds up the process of kind of concepting and coming up with the parts of the final pieces. But it's not, I'm not going to put out anything that's just an AI output. And even with the newsletter, once I get my image, I then bring that in Photoshop and I lay my personalized border around it and the title of my newsletter on top of it, because it's one more step. But there are times where I will use generative fill if something isn't kind of filling
Yeah.
the space
Yeah.
properly, or if I don't like a section, I'll circle it and remove it. Or if they output something that has text in it that obviously is just random shapes that kind of look like letters,
Right.
I'll get rid of that too. But it's rare that I'm using just one tool. And it's really not all that different from when I was just a straight up graphic designer jumping between Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign or Quark before that. And, it's like, okay, I'm using all these tools, but now I have even more tools off to the side that will help speed up the process.
Yeah. Dustin has a great point, Connor. He says, it's like I always say, AI has to fill the entire canvas. If you don't paint it with your own words, the details with your own words, it has to fill it in with its own ideas, and it's usually not what you want, right? So that's very, very true in that. So, yeah, that was
And
cool.
I think that's what a lot of people run into issue-wise. I think for a lot of marketers out there, they can't start with a Procreate because they're not even at that level yet, right? So they do start with AI for ideation and sometimes as the basis of that graphic, and then they take it and try to manipulate it. I think one tool we talk about all the time is Midjourney and how impressive that is, especially from giving you a plethora of options based on the input that you put in. But where it kind of struggles sometimes is finessing those options, right? It has an option you like, you take it, you ask it to make a simple edit, and it kind of goes all cattywampus and changes
Right.
everything on it, right? So, Jim, how can you take those tools and really have the control and edit the path to keep the control to what you want it to? Are there specific steps where you take it from Midjourney into Photoshop, or Photoshop helps you with something almost acting like a surgical tool? How do you go about that?
I run into the same problems that everybody does, where it's starting to get to where I want it to be, and then Midjourney just goes off on a path.
Right.
And I'll go back to a couple versions and I'm like, all right, let's work from here now. And sometimes that'll help and sometimes it won't. Sometimes I'll take that image and then upload it to ChatGPT or some other visual system and try to manipulate things that way. And so, because some of them are better at having a conversation, ChatGPT is really good with creating a conversation within a design, whereas Midjourney at times it almost seems like it's starting over from scratch based on the edited prompt that you've put in. So that can be challenging, and yeah, sometimes they'll get stuck in a rut. So I tend to use when it comes to Midjourney, I usually still use Discord for that, because I have a bunch of different chats that I have for my different use cases. And if something is just, stuck in a rut somewhere and I can't get out of, I can't shake something from 5 or 6 prompts
Mhm.
back, I'll then take that prompt, bring it into a new conversation and run that again, kind of like clear out the cobwebs a little bit.
Yeah, those are great tips. I mean, we use Midjourney a ton. We roll so I call it rolling because it's rolling the dice. Like we roll a lot. Like I start with 7 sets of 4 for any prompt just because it helps me quickly get to where I want. But yeah, so we've got some great. This is Dustin says, he said the hard part is most people don't have the vocabulary to describe what they want. That's why the prompt enhance button where AI can help you craft better prompts is very, very helpful. Very, very true. And Melanie says, I've been seeing there are certain kind of prompts you need to say to AI to properly get what you want. Gemini, Google, a lot of people on socials are using it for content, but needs a certain prompt. And so, yeah, that's very, very good. And she's got a follow-up question we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, this is not a commercial for Magi, but one of the cool things inside of it is the way Dustin has built his interface and the way that he also, you can test out all these different models and you can have it write you prompts better, and all sorts of things. So I'm a big fan of Magi, especially when you're getting started. But one of the things that Melanie follows up with, and Jim, this is a great question for you, it's like, how would you know what to say and how specific do I need to be? I feel like I bring tension and frustration when you don't get what you're asking for. So how do you not fight against the AI, I guess, is the biggest question Melanie's asking.
Well, one of the good things is, unlike a temperamental designer, AI is not going to get upset when you
Right.
critique it. So that already, you're making things much easier there. But one of the tips that I've found is, if I get to kind of a good place with an image, or I find an image of what I'm looking for, I'll upload that to Claude or ChatGPT or something and say, give me the prompt that would create an image like this.
Yeah.
And from there, you can start to see pieces that you might not have thought of, like, oh, the camera angle's here. Oh, the lighting is here. Oh, the resolution is this, depth of field, or whatever it is, however they describe the video or the image. That will start to show you what the AI thinks in order to create that. And then if you take that prompt, make your own personalized edits, and drop it back into your Midjourney or whatever other system, you're probably going to get closer to where you want to be.
Yeah. And Melanie, there's a great tool that I like to use called Gilbletry, especially for creating characters. That's a GPT that's inside of ChatGPT, and it'll actually give you a bunch of different variations, and then also give you those prompts to try in Midjourney, which is a lot of times when I get stuck. Like, let's say, especially if it's an abstract concept, let's say like networking. Like, how can you make that better? We've all seen the guy with the shaking hands and all the stuff around him. So how do you make that better? And so taking a tool like that, and like Jim was saying, dropping it in there and having it describe it to you can save you a ton of time. So that's what I like to do.
We've talked a lot about two things. We've talked a lot about Canva, and we're talking a lot about AI now, and we're going to bring them together here, which is a lot what they have done with their AI features and tools, which gives, of course, Canva non-designers the design capabilities, right? But I think in the wrong hands, it can just make a lot of terrible things as well. So we have to put some guardrails on it. We've talked about this a little bit, Jim, but for those Canva-centric teams, what do you think is the right way to invest in a pro build out of a Canva kind of organization for your company when it comes to templates? Are we locking them down? We're avoiding those AI generated logos. Are we not even asking AI to create anything within there so we can make sure we're sticking with our brand standards? How are you going about Canva with its AI capabilities?
I definitely recommend going with the pro plan, creating a bunch of templates and locking things down so that people aren't doing random acts of design all over the place, because you can't control what somebody's creating, putting out there on their own. So if you can lock that down, you can ensure that everything is owned by you, by your design team, by your brand team, and you don't have to worry about bad things being put out there. Then the other thing that you kind of touched on was, AI created logos. This is where a lot of people don't understand that if you use Canva to create your logo, you can't actually own that logo. And because it's generated by AI. I actually saw somebody on Threads yesterday who said, hey, I've got no budget, how do I get started with design and logo and stuff? And a lot of people are like, talk to a designer, find a friend that's a designer. But somebody said, Canva's great for all that stuff. And I said, you can't actually own that logo. You can't copyright that logo. And the person snapped back at me, saying like, it's good enough. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
As long as you're clear, when you as a branding expert are telling the small business owner, just use Canva for your logo, it needs to be clear that you're giving them bad advice and bad legal advice, because they're going to listen to you based on your bio. But I've got a pretty strong rule about not arguing with ill-informed people that I don't know on the internet. So I just said, as long as you're clear that they can't own it, then that's fine. But yeah, you need to be careful with what's created using AI, because it's not ownable, not only from a copyright or trademark standpoint, but also you don't know if the business across the street got the exact same output from that AI and is also going to start using that logo. So there's just a lot to consider when you're using AI in these DIY tools.
So let's take that a step further. So let's say you get it, like a logo you really like, you made it with AI. would the next logical step to be legal and to make it copyrightable, would it be saying, okay, here to a designer, go, here's what I like. This is what I want kind of, but can you make it so we can copyright it? Or because there was even something, there was an AI artwork that they took into Photoshop and they changed it enough that it passed the copyright standards, at least in the United States, that they were able to manipulate it enough to do that. So would that be the thing that you would want a designer to do if like, because a lot of times we'll fall in love with a logo or we like aspects of it a lot. Was that what you would tell somebody who liked an AI logo that they created in Canva?
It's inspiration. Really, it's no different than if you're going to Google Images and finding ideas, like a mood board almost. But just know that what you're creating in Canva is just mood board material. It's not the real final logo that you're going to actually be able to own.
Very, very good. That's great advice. Before we jump into our last section, we only got a few minutes left. Man, this stuff, Jim is like, I'm nerding out so hard right here. It's just I just love all this stuff. But I want to give a shout out again to our folks at Canva. If you want to make something custom and all visual marketing gold, then you need to check out Ecamm. You can find out more about ecamm.com/Jeff. You can make custom graphics. They do have some templates you can start with, but then modify things to have your own show, your own unique style. You can do that really, really easily with Ecamm. So ecamm.com/Jeff. Save that 15% by using code Jeff15. All right, so let's go really quick to kind of almost like a speed round because there's so many things I want to ask and I'm not going to have time to. But talk about like a feed-ready system of like these 5 fixed elements you've mentioned to keep consistent across like your reels, your shorts, LinkedIn carousels, so people can recognize you at a glance. Because I think that's what we want. We want to stand out in the feed. We want people to recognize our brand. So what are those 5 things that we need to keep consistent?
You need to think about typography, like what fonts you're using, your colors that you're using. Are you using photos? Are you using product photography? Like what do your visuals look like? And then how are things arranged within your palette? And you just want people to be able to recognize those things and hierarchy. How are people kind of scrolling it? How are people visually scrolling it? And, those are kind of the key areas where you want people to lock those things down. And then everything else is kind of swap the elements in and out.
Got it. Great advice. Great advice.
I know there's a million things that can impact the performance of one singular post, right? But Jim, what's your kind of checklist for when you do post something you think it's going to be great and then there's crickets and it underperforms? What's that checklist that you go back to and say, did I do this right? Did I do that right? Could I have changed this to make this post a little bit better? What's that checklist look like?
A lot of it is kind of what I was just saying, where it's what is the hierarchy? What is the first thing you want somebody to see and understand? And then what's the second thing you want them to see and consume? And if you can kind of nail those things down, and you did your design properly, then you can kind of keep going through to triage what the problem is. But if your headline, if you start with big bold type and your headline isn't engaging, okay, then you need to go back and figure out the messaging. If it's not legible at smaller sizes, if the visuals of your typography aren't legible, you need to work on that. Is your image not working because you're using it in a region of the world where that type of person it isn't a common occurrence? Think about those sort of things. And then color, typography, the whole kind of layout. Are you designing to a grid? Like the grid system, something that comes along as you get better at using these design type tools, but things need to align and not be, touching the very edge of the screen or the canvas, whatever it is. And you want to make it easier for people to kind of skim around and see if they want to stop and further consume your content. And if things are all kind of cluttered and jumbled, then that doesn't work as well. So think about the grid underneath also.
I'm thinking of everything I've done wrong in my brand design after reading this book. No, but it's a good thing. It's like he gives you great advice. So make sure you guys pick up this book because it is really, really good. Really quickly, this is a great question by my friend Rich. He says, would the same legal thing be true for Illustrator or Photoshop generated logos with AI? Because Adobe's a different kind of thing because they say they're not training your stuff on, when you make something, they're not going to train on it. And they've supposedly paid for all of their stuff they've been trained on. So Would it be the same thing, Jim, for using Adobe products?
Not a lawyer, but I would say be careful of anything that is AI generated, and then using that for trademarks or copyright. It is interesting, Adobe Stock, if you look there, because there are mixed in, there are AI images within Adobe Stock
Right.
now. And so you need to be careful if you're using something for, an editorial use, that you're not using a fake AI image. And then as you're if you go in and actually open up an image that you like, down below it, there's now a button to say generate alternatives to this photo. So what is a real photo versus what is not a real photo is getting blurrier. So hopefully these stock houses are clearer about what's real and what's not real as things move forward.
Yeah, I'm hoping that they'll have some sort of watermark that'll be, across everything that we'll know, instead of everyone's trying to do their own thing right now, and it's kind of confusing. But hopefully that will come in the future. This is a great question by Amy. She goes, "I do great with colors, logos, fonts, but I really want to use AI to replace the stock images that I repeat. Any tips?"
Yeah, AI is great for updating photo imagery when you have an asset that's going to be used, that's going to be translated or localized, and it's going to be used around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is, here in the United States, we're a melting pot. We have a lot of different diversity with the audiences that we're going after. But if you go to Japan, there's not as much diversity there. So you want to make sure that, the imagery that you have in your ebook or whatever applies to that particular audience. The Middle East, same way. Like, there are certain things that you need to change for different audiences. And AI is actually a good way to update those assets without having to do a full photo shoot with different diverse people.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book, and I thought it was really fascinating. I think, in Western culture, white is a symbol of purity, and then it was associated with death in another culture or something. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that you nail this, especially if you're trying to do like you said, a multinational campaign. Was I correct in that? Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. If you watched Black Panther: Wakanda Forever,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a big funeral scene and everyone's wearing white. But if you went to a funeral in Massachusetts and everyone was wearing white, you'd be like, what is going on? Right? Because it's just, we use color in different ways in different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. So much good stuff in this book. Folks, you need to go get The Visual Marketer. You can get it on Amazon. I have 2 copies. I have this copy. And then what I love to do is I always buy a digital copy because I use a tool called Readwise, because I take notes in my Kindle edition. So everything I highlight, it pops over to Notion in a database that I can just go in, like, what did Jim say that was so good that I can use in one of my presentations? Oh, and it's all in my database. So I know, Jim, you're a big fan of Notion as well. So it's great to, when you're starting doing research and learning new things, it's such a great tool. So Readwise and Notion, but go get his book, folks. It's really awesome. So much good stuff in here. I'm learning so much, and I've nerded out about this stuff for years, but it's making me a better marketer as well. So make sure you guys do check it out. Jim, is there anything that we forgot to ask that we should have asked you that you think that is really important for people in this age of AI?
Just be careful with what you're putting out there, because it's so easy to put out bad content if you're not paying attention. Like, you can generate an image and there might be something way in the background that you don't see, that something nefarious got in there, and because we don't know what any of this information was trained on, right?
Yeah.
So be careful with what the output is and look closely, because you don't want some PR nightmare because something was hidden in the background of one of your social media posts.
Right. All right. Well, for the last couple minutes, I would love for you just to tell people a little about your book and why they should get it. I mean, the floor is yours. Let us know what you got in this book and why it's so good.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's going to be tough to top what you were saying and the praise you were heaping on the book. But the idea behind the book was, I've talked to so many marketers who said, my job would be so much easier if I had your design skills. Mm. So what I did was basically put those things together. I said, okay, how do I teach the basics of design to marketers? People who are using Canva, people who are using AI, people who are maybe dabbling with Photoshop or Illustrator, but don't really know the depths of it. And I don't get into the depths of a lot of those tools, but I explain what's a vector, what's a raster, what are the basics of typography, what's kerning, what the space between the letters. So I explain those things so they start to be able to see what they need to make better designs for when they're making their own designs.
Yeah. So is the best place to pick this up at jimmacleod.com? Is that where the best place to get it?
Yep. Yeah, there's a link from there to book.jimmacleod.com, or
Okay.
Amazon is always the easiest for most folks.
Yeah, and make sure to go there. So jimmacleod.com, and it's spelled JIMMACLEOD. So jimmacleod.com. Make sure you guys who are listening on the podcast go check that out. Connor Brown, the unsinkable Connor Brown. What is going on with you, my friend? What's happening in the world of Vacation Kingdoms?
So much going on. I have a couple fun trips planned for the rest of the year. So follow along at Vacation Kingdoms across social media. And we are well into Q4, which is hard to believe. So I want to hear from you. Where do you want to travel to in 2026? Shoot me an email, Connor, CONOR, at vacationkingdoms.com.
And as always, I'd love for you guys to join my newsletter at jeffc.com/news. We have fun every week in the email community. So make sure you guys go check that out, jeffc.com/news. And with that, thanks again to our folks over at Ecamm for sponsoring the show, ecamm.com/Jeff. And with that, we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.